I think the first time humans race in space, it's going to be the most watched sporting event in the history of sports. I will die on that hill. If sports in space can eventually become 5%, 7% of the sports market, it's tens of billions of dollars every year. We've always taken anything that is expensive and goes fast and raced it. That's just part of human nature. I'm taking that and I'm just changing the context in which it's happening. I think there's a real chance that we end up in a global conflagration at some point in the near term. That scares the hell out of me. If there is conflict in space, highly likely space will be inaccessible for a period of time. And I'm dead. I mean, bottom line, I don't exist. Everyone, the moment they understand exactly what it is that I'm pitching, racing, spacecraft in space, they're like, oh, awesome, cool. Like, how do you make this work? I have a million questions. I've got 5 teams that have already committed to racing in one way, shape, or form in 2028. It's this idea of inevitability, right? It's that this will happen. The worst case scenario is I'm a little bit too early, right? That's the risk. But I think the technical story tells me that that's not true, right? The fact that all the things I need already exist means I'm not too early. It will be the most watched sporting event in the history of sports because every person with a smartphone is going to get that push notification saying, humans flying around the moon for the first time in world first competition. Everyone's clicking that link. Every single person is clicking that link, right? I will have more viewers of that than any other live event ever. Stay tuned because it's the future of sport.
What's going on, people, and welcome back to another episode of Through a Different Lens podcast. Today's episode is a very different one because we're stepping out of our usual conversation. It does, of course, include sport, which is our main thing, a bit of culture, live entertainment. You know, that's what we do. But we're looking forward to the future in this sense. Obviously, it's your boy Joe here.
It's Bedge.
It is Jacob.
And today we are joined by Philip Hover-Smoot. Apologies if I pronounced.
No, you got it right. Spot on.
Fantastic. He is the CEO of Scout Space as well as the Atlas Cup, which we're going to go into. It's a company working on space sustainability, orbital safety, and the future infrastructure of space travel. But what makes today's conversation really interesting is that Philip isn't just involved in the technical side of aerospace. He's also exploring how entertainment, competition, and even sport could eventually exist in space. He's also connected to the Atlas Cup, which I mentioned earlier. It's a concept that's been described as Formula One meets America's Cup in orbit. And you guys already know us. You know we love Formula One. So once we saw that, we were like 100%. Essentially turning space into a competitive sporting and entertainment environment. So this isn't just a conversation about satellite and rockets, which you guys might think so, but it's really a conversation about where humanity is heading, who owns space, could future wars happen in orbit? Who knows? I'm just jumping the gun. Future athletes become astronauts. There we go. But yeah, welcome, Philip, and thank you very much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you for having me, guys. Really appreciate the time this morning. And yeah, happy to kind of dive into everything and give you an overview of what we're building at Atlas Cup, how we kind of came to the idea and where it's going to go and what it kind of means. And I think I love this lens that you guys have approached this through about the cultural and the sociological element as well is really, really fascinating to us because I think that is really why we're going to be successful in what we're doing because space as an entertainment arena or context is actually really interesting because of some really unique traits that it has socially and culturally. It is phenomenally magical and it is inspirational and it has driven really kind of fascinating media through the years, right? Everything all the way back to the caves at Lascaux, having, Orion's belt on the wall, through Starry Night from Van Gogh, through, The Expanse and For All Mankind. I mean, pick a media format over the years, space has been there, right? And I think that combination of that magic with the classic heritage racing that we're trying to build is just great. So yeah, let me back up though, before I get into all of that, because we have plenty of time here. And one quick correction. So I was CEO at Scout Space until end of last year, and I actually exited to go build Atlas Cup. So all good, but just wanted to clarify. I'm sure my Josiah, who now runs Scout, would be annoyed if I was out there telling people I was still the CEO of Scout. But anyways, so yeah, I exited my role as CEO of Scout Space, which is a kind of leading space domain awareness and optics provider for in-space operations. So think cameras looking at things in space from space, primarily for the military and intelligence community. I left that job to go do what I'm doing now, which is introducing professional sports to space, which is kind of insane when I say it out loud with people like you, but it's entirely realistic. And I can walk you through why it's realistic and where the state of the art is, and why this is actually a very simple business to go execute. And my real risks come down to creating world-class entertainment content and distributing it to fans and making sure that my sponsors' activations are actually, providing a return on investment. And that's an interesting conversation as well. So let me back up even further and say, okay, sports in space, what does that look like? People have had this idea for a very long time. It's also been in the social context for a very long time, right? It's been in media. We've had, again, The Expanse has had a space racing element to it. We've had Star Trek episodes that have a sports component. There's been a concept around what competitive behavior can be in space for a very long time. So I'm not the first, right? This is not like I can't sit here and pretend like I've got the one idea that no one's ever had before. Absolutely not, right? I'm taking a pre-existing theme and I'm taking a pre-existing competitive format, i.e. racing, high-tech racing. Think America's Cup, F1, Sail GP, NASCAR. It doesn't really matter. We've always taken anything that is expensive and goes fast and raced it. That's just part of human nature. I'm taking that, and I'm just changing the context in which it's happening. And then I'm going to go take some really amazing images and video of it, produce it, provide some of the backdrop and some of the storytelling around the technology and the companies and the leadership and the engineers. And then I'm going to go create short format content and distribute via social and mobile, which is where today's sports consumers are really going. So again, it's not necessarily new in the sense that I'm not recreating the wheel here. I'm taking trusted, proven formats and trusted, proven technology. The space tech world, again, we'll kind of get into what that ecosystem looks like, but it's quite mature at this point, right? We're talking hundreds of companies building things like propulsion systems, hundreds of companies building satellites, dozens of companies building cameras and fielding cameras in space. This is not something that requires new things to be built and tested. This is all existing tech. I'm just stitching it together in a way that no one's done before. So again, racing head-to-head in space. We love this idea, right? This is the fastest sport in history the moment it happens. And we're looking at trying to go create content as soon as humanly possible, but we're leading up towards a 2028 Grand Prix. So this is going to be our first main event. This is starting in approximately 24 months, but realistically, the satellites that are going to be flying are going to be launching well before then. So it sounds a long ways off, but it's really not. 2028, mid 2028 is pretty darn close from a space operations and planning perspective. But even prior to that, we're looking at a whole bunch of different things. We can take existing satellites that are in space today and have them perform certain maneuvers, kind of in coordination or over a fixed distance. And we can do sprint format racing or time trials format racing. Think the first week of the Tour de France. There's an option to go off and go do that as soon as the end of this year. We have interest from a company that's planning to race to go off and go do an exposition run, basically a non-competitive demonstration run where they'll go do dramatic altitude raises and left turns and right turns and diagonals, and they'll demonstrate their maneuver capability as if they were racing. We could do that potentially next year. And then of course 2028, where we're going to have our professional class, big performant, small car sized spacecraft that are in space, again, performing a series of complex maneuvers. We're going to compare apples to apples. Who does it best? Who does it fastest? Who's most accurate? Who gets DQ'd because they missed a turn or they went too far? There's a lot of storytelling around how this can work. But let me pause there and kind of and back up and say, where should I start, right? I mean, there's so many different ways I can take it. I can talk about the technology. I can talk sports angle. I can talk about how we're planning to produce it. I can talk about the sponsor activations. So where should I dive in first? Because I'm a lawyer by trade and I will literally keep talking until someone kicks me out of this thing. So
I'll be honest, start early interest, the background and everything that you've like thought about leading up to the company, and why space? Why this?
Yeah. So I'll start with like a quick overview of just me, right? So as I mentioned, like I'm an attorney, right? So not a traditional background for someone to be running a space company. Like I went to college in coastal California and studied art history. And then I tried to become a home builder in 2008, which is a terrible time to be trying to build homes. Then I went to law school and business school because I didn't know what to do with my life. Then I ended up doing aerospace, and I ended up doing well and eventually ended up running a company. And that it's pure hard work and luck, right? It's just right place, right time. And the reality is I've had a number of roles over the last, let's say 10 years in aerospace, primarily in the defense world, but I've ended up touching a whole bunch of things that are necessary to go make this business happen, right? I've done maneuverable platforms at Momentus and Spaceflight. I've done launch at Spaceflight and Momentus. I've done optics at Scout, and I've done a lot of the underlying regulatory stuff across that whole spectrum at Raytheon and all the space startups that I've been at. And that's given me, weirdly, the right skill set to go off and go execute really the first professional entertainment product in space, right? Which really requires an understanding of the ecosystem, an understanding of the operating environment, and an ability to go effectively handle the compliance and regulatory environment. And that's something that I can go do. But fundamentally, I'm not a space guy, right? So I like aerospace in the sense that I'm a plane guy. I love aircraft. I would be happy as a clam doing something with 737s. It's not necessarily that space is like, I'm not one of those space guys who's like, oh my gosh, we need to go colonize the moon and go to Mars. More power to them. I wish them the best, but that's not me. I think space is really beautiful and interesting and the tech's cool, but I think planes are way cooler. I just ended up in space because of a whole bunch of, personal decisions around wanting to move out of defense. And then the opportunity. And I think the opportunity here is really what's appealing. It's like the Wild West. Space today is about to become $1 trillion economy, according to Morgan Stanley. We've got SpaceX going public basically any day now, right? They filed their S1 yesterday. We're talking about trillions of dollars of market cap the day they list, and it's probably going to double the day it lists, right? That's wild. And there is an entirely open field here where you can go off and go carve your little niche and pick your lane and go own it. And sports thus far is largely untouched. There are some people out there that have been doing it, and we're in conversation with all of them in a bunch of different ways, but we're going to be the first ones to go execute on it. And I think by executing on the idea first, we're going to own the entire space. So we want to own not just racing in space, but sports, competitive activity in space is what we're trying to own. And we're trying to produce a world-class production stack and distribution capabilities so that we can go off and go produce not just racing activities, but others. And I'll get into that. I'm kind of getting too far down the road. Back to how I got here, right? So back in COVID, 2019, 2020, sitting in the gym, watching Drive to Survive and The Expanse like everyone else. And I'm sitting there thinking, I just moved into the space industry specifically. And I was like, man, why hasn't someone done this? All the tech exists, right? Like we've got maneuverable platforms, we've got tracking capabilities. To be fair, there's a human element there, which I'm not proposing today that humans race in space. I'm talking about really kind of drone racing league-esque activity where it's kind of remotely controlled. But over time, we'd love to have humans race in space, right? 10, 20 years down the road, I think the first time humans race in space, it's going to be the most watched sporting event in the history of sports. I will die on that hill. It will be the most watched sporting event in the history of sports because every person with a smartphone is going to get that push notification saying humans flying around the moon for the first time in world first competition. Everyone's clicking that link. Every single person is clicking that link, right? I will have more viewers of that than any other live event ever. That will happen, but we're just not, I'm realistic. That's 20 years down the road, right? So we'll get there. We're just not trying to work on that today. But, it was this realization of, hey, this is a really cool concept. It's this intrinsically appreciable thing that I talk to people day in and day out right now. And everyone, the moment they understand exactly what it is that I'm pitching, racing, spacecraft in space, they're like, oh, awesome, cool. Like, how do you make this work? I have a million questions. And it's that intrinsic appeal combined with the fact that there's no technologies needed to go develop to go do this. And that's a big issue for the space industry right now. People are investing billions of dollars to go build and fly things that by and large break about half the time, right? This was a huge amount of investment going into the tech, and the tech is uncertain, but that's happened, right? We've gone through that cycle of these companies burning through billions of dollars to go off and go prove what works. We're now arguably matured. We have an industrial base that allows us to not focus on having to go build new technologies, but instead apply those technologies to new applications and creative pursuits. And that's what this is. We're just taking existing tech and creating something new with it. And the easiest way to do that today, even though we have many other ideas, the easiest way, lowest risk way of doing it is a maneuver-based racing competition in space. And it is, again, basically no technical risk. Everything I need already exists and it's proven. I just go buy it. Which, back to kind of the origin story here, is I'm not a technologist. I'm not an engineer. Like, I studied like art history and went to law school. I don't know how to build a spacecraft. But what I can do is I can write contracts, right? And I can build a business that's based around partnerships and vendor agreements, right? Where if I don't have to build anything and I'm just relying on people to go off and go do what they're already doing well, I can just go buy stuff. I can partner with people. I can do collaboration agreements. I can bring on teams. I can incentivize teams to come to me where I'm not paying them to go build special spacecraft. They're already building them. They're just going to bring them and race them for me, right? I'm not paying someone to go off and go build a camera system for me. They're already building it. I'm just going to say, hey, when you have free time, point it over this way and send me the photos, right? That makes it intrinsically doable for someone like me with my arguably non-traditional background to go off and go do this. So I'm bringing down the risk, I'm bringing down the expense, and I'm making this intrinsically executable for someone like me. And also in the world of AI, it's also something that I can do with a very low headcount, right? I mean, right now it's me, but we've been around for just 4 months. We have dozens of partners signed up. I've got 5 teams that have already committed to racing in one way, shape, or form in 2028 or later. I've got offers to go off and go do television appearances. I've got opportunities for M&A coming up. I've got all of the things that I thought would take me 18 months to go get, I got in basically the first 3 months. So the interest is there, the opportunity is there. People in industry on the space side and the sports side seem to realize, hey, this is doable. And hell, if you can pull this off, people are going to watch. Maybe it's not like the world's biggest sport day one. Of course not, right? It'll take time to build a fan base and kind of develop the sport and the production capability, but we'll get there. So I'm sorry, that was a very long answer to a very simple question about the origin here. But again, back to COVID time, just this realization that this is intrinsically doable and no one's doing it yet. And it stuck with me for about 5 years. March of last year, I went to my board at Scout and was like, hey, I want to go do something else. Started that process, exited that company about 9 months later, end of last year, started this company in January of this year, and it's been off to the races, as they say, since then.
Just a quick one on that. When I was doing some research, I saw that you're from a family of attorneys, but you also mentioned that you've got some world record holders in your family in terms of like the aerospace aspect. How was it when you pitched that idea to them or told them? Like, was it an easy transition for you and your family in that sense? Because even though you've got the law background, you're also all into the aerospace kind of things.
Yeah, it's interesting. The family element here is kind of mixed, right? So both my parents are attorneys. They are very supportive, if a little bit skeptical of the kind of insanity of what it is that I'm doing, right? I think that's just the parents being parents, right? They're like, well, wait, what are you trying to do? You're going to quit your job as CEO to go start a space sport? Like, are you insane? But they came around and are quite supportive. The history though is actually really kind of interesting, right? So my family is full of people who have some connection to aerospace or piloting, really again on the aircraft side. So those world records are for things like fastest distance and fastest climb and certain types of jet aircraft. And those records were held by my uncle, who actually died in a plane crash. So he's no longer around. But before he did, he actually started one of the premier aircraft racing leagues called the Sport Class. So it's still active in air racing circles today. And Sport Class is basically a custom high power propeller turbine aircraft that basically goes and flies a series of maneuvers. So I can't say that there's no logical connection between that. I grew up in this environment, like knowing about these things and hearing about these things and being part of the kind of the family dialogue. So it was very natural to see that opportunity and be like, well, look, weirdly, like someone I'm related to built a new sport class using aircraft. Why can't I build a new sport class using spacecraft? Someone's already done this. It's not, again, I'm not creative in the sense that I came up with ideas. I'm truly taking what I've seen around me that's proven, that's been done. I'm just reconfiguring it to apply to the space age. That's effectively it.
That's business though, isn't it? That's literally business.
Absolutely, right? I think about it. I don't know if you guys have read the book, The Medici Effect, but it's this idea that you can have really unrelated kind of intellectual pursuits. And at some point, some of the most interesting, creative business opportunities have come out of that, where you've, random, like a tulip grower meets a cardboard manufacturer, and suddenly we've got international flower transport, right? Things that don't make sense at the time, that someone can kind of see through the murk and say, hey, we can connect A with B and end up with C, and C might be value additive. Great, let's go try it. And not saying that I'm, this is still very early, and I'm very realistic about the risks here, right? This is a big concept, and there's a lot that has to be done. And my job is to go off and go execute on it and make it real. But it is doable, right? I mean, the risk is on me to basically, if I fail, it's because I didn't execute on something that I know is doable. That's fine. I love that kind of risk, right? It's not external risk. It's not like I need anyone else to go. If someone else fails, it doesn't really affect me, right? This is purely internal risk for me. And I know what to do. I know how to do it. I just have to go basically burn for 18 months, and I will get done what no one else has done before.
Where does this work ethic come from? Because I can see your passion and everything you're saying. Like, where does it come from? That's what I want to know.
Okay, so the one picture I've got on my desk, so it comes from family. I can't really see it all that well, but like, this is my great grandfather, and he was an oil wildcatter in the West. So he basically like went from the East Coast out to the West in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and like took his family around in a Model T Ford and dug oil wells on spec. And he would go from town to town, raise investor money, dig a well. Sometimes they would produce oil, sometimes they wouldn't, and he would run out of town and get chased, right? And there's these kind of like amazing family stories around this kind of myth of what he did, and sometimes it worked out and sometimes it didn't, and over time he did really well. And this is a phenomenal entrepreneurial story, and that's been kind of passed down kind of generation to generation, and then kind of baked into how I've approached the world, right? It was always very much thou shalt be a lawyer, because family of lawyers, both my grandfathers were lawyers. It's like there was no way I wasn't going to be a lawyer, but there's always been this realization that, with opportunity and some level of privilege, like, take risks, go do something. Don't rest on one's laurels and just kind of coast through life. Go try to do something. Don't be an idiot. Don't take stupid risks, but go take risks. And I think that's very much part of how I grew up. And also I grew up in the Bay Area. Like, I was born in San Francisco. I grew up in Silicon Valley during like the .com boom, right? I mean, every year of my life, some random person I know has like made God knows how much money off of some random stock that's done really well. And it's really hard to live in that environment for decades and not have it infect you a little bit and think, okay, random people are doing amazing things. You just have to put yourself out there and try, right? And yes, it's hard work, and yes, it's luck. You could be the smartest, hardest working person with the best product and still fail just by luck. But you can't win if you don't play, right? So I think that idea of trying to find something to do is really important. Again, I mentioned I'd started right after college. I started building homes in Silicon Valley, and it was 2008. It was like the financial crisis. It was the worst possible time to be trying to start a home building business. But, built a couple homes, sold the business for like $1,000, lost a bunch of money, went to law school. I've had a million different business ideas over the year. And that's also kind of why I really enjoyed the transition out of traditional defense, right? I was at Raytheon, like 100,000 person defense company. And I went to a Series A startup as like employee 17 or something like that. And like that shift was wild. And I loved every minute of it. It was chaos, absolute chaos. And I just thrived because we took that company public at $1.7 billion. And then it all blew up. Everyone lost everything. But like for a moment there, we all got rich. Like it was that proverbial Silicon Valley thing. It was a Silicon Valley company. And we went from like no company at all to going public at 1.7 billion in like something like 2.5, 3 years. And like everyone for a couple days there got to look at their brokerage accounts and be like, oh my God, like it happened to us. Like we everyone's made a lot of money here. Before anyone could sell, everyone lost everything and the company fell apart. But such is the way of the world. But that mentality, it's almost like gambling, right? It's almost this addictive thing where you're like, you've got to go after it. And once you kind of started to taste it, it's hard to go back to like a normal job at a big company and just kind of coast through to retirement. It doesn't make sense.
Well, I mean, you've been on the ultimate high of highs by the sounds of it. Just in terms of like, you spoke about Silicon Valley and where you're located. One, in terms of how has it been like seeking expert advice in this and then somewhat trying to pitch the idea to investors, especially with where you're located. And then two, obviously, like again, I said we're like big sports centric fans. We know Golden State Warriors, which is your local team, effectively they're the most valuable team in the NBA. Like, is there any forward thinking in terms of not necessarily bringing in Golden State Warriors, for instance, but trying to intertwine what they've done over the last few years to see how they brought their valuation up? And then, yeah.
Absolutely. So we're very early still, right? So we actually haven't been actively fundraising just yet. Raising our initial round, we've now brought on 5 investors. That happened completely organically, right? I basically had made the decision to go off and go do this, and then mentioned it to people in friends and kind of like personal network. And they were like, this is awesome. How do we participate? Like, let me put in some money. I'm like, great, this is cool. So we haven't tried to raise institutional capital yet, but we are just about to go start to do that. It's partially why I'm out here kissing babies and shaking hands and doing every podcast I can get on, is to help kind of tell that story and get some excitement going. So we certainly look favorably upon the Silicon Valley tech funding ecosystem, because we're not a traditional tech investment, right? We're not a software company. We're not like a deep tech hardware play. We're a little bit different, but I think different plays well here. And we also have, I have a good network in this world, right? I've also kind of, for years, I've as an attorney, I've had side clients, right? So I've a fairly diverse network of people kind of around the aerospace tech world. Some of whom have direct connections into Northern California sports teams. So we have some good connectivity in there. Not to be fair to the Warriors directly, which is absolutely phenomenal. I saw the Valkyries just passed $1 billion in valuation for the WNBA team. And that's wild and good for them. But my God, there's a lot of money flowing through professional sports right now, which is part of the appeal, of course. But yeah, so, I think we look at this really, really, really positively. From an advisory perspective, that's really interesting. We have 2 very specific threads in the business, right? And we need to be successful on both, right? So we've got the space operations side and we've got the media sports side, right? And on the space operations side, which I think most people look at this, what I'm building, and think like, man, that's the hard part. Like, that's the easy part for me, right? Like I can go produce the event and get licensing and operators to go do the maneuvers pretty darn straightforwardly. My problem is translating that into world-class entertainment product that people look at and are excited by, because it's space, it's dark, things are moving really fast, but over really long distances. So we've got a timing format issue, and I've got to translate potentially long format races where you've got little refrigerators basically, or small Mini Coopers flying through space in a very dark area, and make it visually interesting and make the storytelling good and make it personal and visceral and emotional. And I think that's the challenge. So when we look at our advisory board, what we brought on thus far is really focused in sports world, right? It's primarily focused around, okay, I know I have a gap in my skill set around media, sports, production, entertainment, storytelling. How do we go close that? So we've got 2 publicly announced advisors on right now: Sandy Brown, the former commissioner of Major League Lacrosse, former head of sport for Univision, former head of sport for ESPN Asia. Deep history in new challenger sports and the media production distribution side. And then we also have Mark Kamler. He's a TV producer who does basically unscripted, meaning kind of like reality doc type TV. And he's very focused on space world and has done a lot of really interesting projects in that. So we love that. And we've got 3 other advisors that we're bringing on board momentarily, and they are all really focused on sports. They're either former executives at new sports startups, I think an eVTOL racing league, or they are somehow connected to broadcast world. People who have actually scaled broadcasting capabilities and kind of understand that ecosystem very, very well. So that's what I've been looking for. And to your original question, that's actually not a Bay Area thing. That's not a Silicon Valley expertise, right? That's a New York, LA, London thing, right? Which is why I mentioned before, like I've been in the UK quite a bit this year. I'm trying to really network my way into that sports ecosystem, because I need to learn that. I need to build out that expertise. I need those people to be my advisors and find the right partners, because right now I know I need to spend a lot of money with people to help me produce, right? I need to take a lot of video content and imagery and visualization stuff, and I need to go produce world-class content. And I know I don't know how to do that. And there's some risk here where if I don't find the right advisors, I'm going to end up either buying the wrong products and wasting some money or time, which is even riskier, or it's not going to be efficient, right? So I need to find the right advisors on the sports side to help me go navigate this. And yeah, so I mean, I think over time, I love the idea of San Francisco being our HQ. I'm from the Bay Area. It's the Bay Area, right? San Francisco's been at the forefront of pretty much every technological revolution for 150 years. Yeah. But sports is maybe not a Bay Area bedfellow, right? I mean, it is entirely possible that in time we have to relocate so we're more connected to an ecosystem of people who actually execute these things every single day. So Silicon Valley, good in some ways, but maybe not perfect for sports.
I do have a question about how you're building your team. Have you come across anyone that you thought was a good fit, but just somehow they just wasn't a good fit?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are being very, very selective. So right when we kind of publicly announced in January, we went to hire 2 roles, and we had great feedback. One was like a BD role and one was a technical role. The technical role, we had very few applicants just because we were looking for someone with a PhD in astrophysics to go do course design. And there's just not that many people out there. Right? So that role we ended up replacing with a number of fractional engineering support services, where basically we've got some consultants who are doing what we need anyways. And to be fair, we probably didn't need a full-time engineer to come on board right now. We don't have that much work to do. We have some initial designs, and then we're going to have a pause basically where we're waiting for racing to start. And in that period, I'm not totally sure what I would do with an engineer. The BD role though was phenomenal. We had hundreds of applicants almost overnight, and we hired none of them. We ended up also bringing on a fractional to go help U.S. sponsorship and partnership outreach. We're looking at bringing on a non-U.S. person to help with East Asia, China, Japan, Korea, and potentially one in Europe. And I think that makes sense now, because again, I don't know what I don't know, and we have no time pressure to push and make a decision that might yield the risk you flag, right? Maybe we hire someone as kind of employee number 1, and then they're the wrong person. That could be really damaging and difficult for us at this stage. We've got enough funding. I've got enough time. We're moving fast enough here where I think I've got a period of time here, maybe 3, 6, maybe even 9 more months, where I can go and take my time and kind of deliberately go find the right solutions. And I can go play out a couple of short-term contractor roles and see what works, what doesn't work, what do I not know, how do I make a better decision from the hiring perspective moving forward. So that's how we're approaching it. I'm going to be totally fine, especially in the age of AI, where I can do a lot more with some of these tools than I probably could have ever done a year ago. Right. I think I can get through the next 6 to 9 months and scale and engage my vendor network and build my sponsorship world and go build team excitement and start producing some content to go build fan excitement and create some of that content backlog. I can do all of that myself and go raise money, at which point, if I get to the end of the year and I've got a clear lineup publicly announced for my teams, I've got my vendor ecosystem for production lined up and set, I've got early sponsor interest from the contractors we've got that are out working on that, and I've raised a small seed round of a couple $1 million, then I can go higher, and I'm going to be in a really strong position to get the absolute perfect person. And I just don't feel that time pressure right now. I think that's a really unique point, because I think the world is so different today than it was even just 12 months ago, right? One of the key metrics that investors traditionally look at for investments and new startups is like, how many other people have you made drink the Kool-Aid? How many people have bought into this vision and are willing to take a tiny salary and a bunch of equity to come on board? And I think that model is broken. I think AI has broken it, right? For someone like me who's building a non-technical application layer, if you will, on top of existing infrastructure, where I don't need a deep bench of 15 engineers, I don't need to have heads. I don't need to go prove that I've got, pick a random executive who quit their job to come work for $50,000 a year and 5% of the company in equity to go justify that this is real. Like, I've already shown that, right? I had senior leaders from FANG companies, right? Like Facebook, Amazon, like those companies apply, like senior C-suite leaders applied to jobs at us with 0 employees when I put up my head of partnerships role for BD. That blew my mind when I saw it was, to be fair, it was one person. When that person applied, I was like, oh my God, what is this person doing applying to my job? Like, I've raised a couple $100,000. Like, what is this person smoking? Like, this is insane. And I talked to them and I'm like, I would love to hire you. Holy shit, this would be amazing. But I can't. Like, I can't afford you. No, like, no less can I even justify having you take the risk. It just doesn't make sense. But so, I mean, in the sense that like hiring can be a good signal for an investor that any entity is doing well and has an appealing idea and a compelling story, I think we've shown that. We've demonstrated that. I can document that. But I don't need to hire. I just don't need to hire right now. And I don't want to, right? And even let's say I raise $3 million tomorrow. I'm not going to immediately turn around and just like speed hire as many people as I can. I don't want to or need to do that. The first 1 or 2 hires for this are going to be some of the most important roles ever. And fundamentally, and not to get too messianic, but like a little bit, like these are important roles that if I'm successful and the business is successful, these roles will have a real impact on space and how the economy works and what the future of entertainment looks like and the future of sport. It has to be the right person. Like I can't have, the random Joe Schmo from down the block kind of be the person who's doing that. It just doesn't work. It has to be spot on and it has to be done right the first time. So we're taking a very deliberate approach. Sorry, again, very long answer to a very simple question. So I apologize for being long-winded, but
no, it's honestly okay. We actually like the longer answers because you're giving us a sense of real detail.
Yeah, that was perfect. Because I was gonna have a follow-up for that question now.
Sure.
Have you come across any anti-space people that you've spoken to and they're just not going for your pitch?
Yeah, so not specific to Atlas Cup, but certainly that's a world that I know well. So I think again, as a regulatory attorney and I live in Northern California, right? I mean, we're very sustainability focused and kind of environmental responsibility focused. And so am I personally, right? So I do take very seriously some of the broader concerns that the, public has around the commercialization of space. Things like, kind of disturbing the night sky with satellites flying overhead when all you want to do is see an undisturbed set of stars. And to be fair, I live in the mountains. I love looking up and seeing just a perfect, pristine starscape on clear nights. It's gorgeous. It's amazing. It's like, it's a emotional thing. And so I think that's a very important point, right? So there's a couple of initiatives across the Western pantheon around like dark sky initiatives, right? Like limiting lights at night to make sure that like to the kind of the night environment is kept pure. Like, absolutely. I totally support that. And I would love to find creative ways to go make sure that whatever we do doesn't create a problem or kind of further complicate an existing problem, right? Is it a concern that I think would materially change what we're doing? Not at this point, no. But I would also flag, this is a kind of a quick aside. In parallel with creating Atlas Cup, I also created the Fédération Internationale des Sports Orbitaux. It's basically a nonprofit in Paris that I started with an attorney friend that I went to law school with. And the idea is we want to be the FIA or FIFA of orbital sport. And not because we're necessarily at a position where we want to go promulgate all the rules, because we don't know what the rules are yet. I mean, we're still figuring it out, right? There's other sports that are out there, right? UFC is talking with the space station company about filming a fight in space. We think obviously there's a whole bunch of considerations they probably haven't thought about that we would want them to think about. And that's kind of how we're approaching this. But we want that organization, FISO, to be the standards kind of promulgating authority, right? To say, hey, media, sports media, entertainment in space is going to happen. It's inevitable. But let's be smart about it, right? Let's be responsible about human safety, about safety of operation, about sustainability and responsibility, whether it's disruptions to the night sky or potentially even disruptions on the lunar surface. So a lot of companies looking at how to commercialize the lunar surface, including multiple firms looking at doing lunar racing. So buggies on the moon controlled from the ground effectively. And some of those ideas are really, really cool. And we talk to these people all the time. But there are legitimate concerns about what that means for an undisturbed physical environment, right? The lunar surface at this point is very dusty, and if you go kind of muck it up, that mucking it up is going to be there forever, right? So are we willing to sacrifice portions of the moon to be visibly kind of damaged or disturbed to support the development of a sports property? I don't know. Maybe we identify certain regions and those regions become eligible for commercialization and things like, recreational dune buggy racing on the moon. I don't know. But we do think that we have an opportunity here to be forward leaning and proactive and think about these things and talk about these things and hopefully provide some structure around these things and make sure that the right topics are being discussed and also engage internationally, right? So FISO is looking to engage with organizations as broad ranging as UNESCO, right? But thinking about world heritage and is the night sky or is the lunar surface part of our shared human heritage? I think it is, right? So I think there's an interesting element to engage with and collaborate with UNESCO. We also want to do things like work with the World Anti-Doping Agency, right? Because fundamentally, at some point, we will have humans in space. Is an entirely different physiological element to the medicine behind sports medicine for a UFC fighter on a space station. Well, what does it mean if you've been taking a bunch of nitric oxide and creatine and, testosterone and suddenly you're in space? We don't know. And that's fine. And I'm not saying we don't do things because we have unknowns. I think space is risk, and that's perfectly fine. And so long as people are aware of it, great. But these aren't things that we can put on blinders and just pretend aren't questions. Like, let's have the conversation. And we're probably a little early for some of those things, but that's fine, right? Like, maybe we just start the conversation and we let it hang out for a couple of years. But we want to be right at the forefront of that because we think it's really important. And that, to your original question, gets back to how I address that, because we will have those questions. We will get that pushback from people, and inevitably. And I'm kind of surprised it hasn't happened yet. And I want to be able to say in good conscience that I take it seriously, and that not only do we take it seriously, but we're proactively engaging through FISO to go be a leader, to go off and go make sure that people are doing the right thing. And we're thinking about the right stuff. And frankly, it's not always going to be just me trying to figure it out. Like, we want to engage others to make sure that this is a community discussion and that there's good for all that comes from this. Because I do think broadly, mission-wise, I think competitive behavior in space can actually be a catalyst for good, right? And quickly, let me just explain what I mean by that. For the industry, I think professional racing and sport can do for the space industry what professional racing did for the automotive industry. And if you look at the early 1900s, the automotive racing ecosystem was absolutely phenomenally important in the development and industrialization of the car, right? It created anti-lock brakes and power steering and active suspension. It created new technologies and it brought them to market faster. It created like quality systems and a reliable industrial base, focused on excellence and performance and reliability that was really important to make these things useful and safe and reliable, that we could scale them across the planet. And we need the same thing to happen for space. And I think that, connecting the dots a little bit, that can actually be good for humans, because I've had the pleasure to do some really cool stuff in space over the years. And I've launched a satellite that counted tuna in the South China Sea to ensure that fishery stocks are being properly managed, and satellites that look for wildfires and help save lives and homes and protect the forests. That's good. I like that. I want more of that. And if we can make them better, smarter, faster, while also doing something really fun and cool and exciting that's, compelling and has great storytelling and content elements that I can go make money off of, great. I get to play capitalist and social, promoter at the same time. And that makes me happy. It's generally a positive approach. And that's beautiful, because right now the space industry is so focused on defense world, it's a little bit exhausting. And don't get me wrong, I've been in defense world a long time. I'm a patriot. I want all the good things that defense can do to continue to happen, but I don't want to do that every single day. I don't want to be in defense world. I don't want to build weapon systems. I want to go use space for something that does good and is fun. And I think I can do that and make a bunch of money at the same time.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. You said something in between there about the athletes. You see how most sports now are driven by superstar athletes, and it's kind of the forward motion and how they're working. How do you see your sport in space driven by superstar athletes and things like that?
Totally. So let me start kind of broadly with our approach to how we storytell, if you will, and set the context for racing operations, and then talk a little bit about the personalities in space, because I think both are really appealing here. so again, Drive to Survive kind of broke the dam open, right? It created this realization that, one, the sports documentary world is attractive, and now there's 20 sports documentaries running constantly, and it also introduced this realization that fans were kind of, I guess, to oversimplify, right? I think that the traditional approach to what the fan demographic was okay, they like things that go fast, make a lot of noise, and they want to drink a beer and have a hot dog on a Saturday afternoon, right? And I think what we've realized is there's actually a technical element where, some fans are kind of nerdy and they'll get wonky over, oh my gosh, there's a centimeter difference with this wing, or they changed the tires for this reason, or here's what the barometer said. And there's this technical storytelling suddenly became part of the story, right? And along with that, we saw this interest as well in the politics behind the businesses and the families of the people involved, kind of like the holistic story of, okay, here's the event on a Saturday afternoon, but what's all the stuff that happens for the weeks and months leading up to it, and their world with their boss and their team and their family? There's storytelling there that suddenly people realized is interesting to people. And we want to lean into that. So starting in January, we're going to go to our team's facilities every month, and we're going to do a check-in. And we're going to take a professional production team, and we're going to show up for a day, and we're going to take video and interview, and we're going to talk to the CEOs and the program managers and the engineers building these things. We're going to show people in clean rooms touching these like really cool looking things hanging from the ceiling. We're going to go tell that story. So by the time we get to actual race operations, it's not as simple as, hey, here's a short video of some stuff flying through space with some statistics. People will know, okay, well, this satellite made this decision a year ago to go with solution A, whereas their competitor went with solution B. And oh, look, now solution B is doing great and solution A is like back there, right? Mm-hmm. That gives a lot more drama and storytelling to the evolution of the sport and its introductory year, but also allows us to make kind of a unique take on that story of like the superstar athlete, right? Like we're going to make the engineers kind of the story, at least initially, right? Over time, we want to have humans racing in space, but the reality is, even for humans in space, let's be realistic, they're all going to be engineers anyways, right? I mean, to be an astronaut, it's a very specific skill set. It's highly unlikely we're going to have, again, Joe Schmo off the street be like the best in first round, spacecraft pilot, right? Yeah. So there has to be a storytelling around technical development and operation of the satellites, and that's an engineering story. And to be fair, some engineers are great on camera, some are not, and we're going to have to go kind of navigate this and find the ones that are more interesting than not. But I have no doubt. I know a ton of people in this industry, and there are plenty of people who would be really, really compelling from a storytelling perspective. And then back out one layer further to the idea of the iconic superstar, like the figures that really draw interest, right? It's like the Lewis Hamiltons for, like people just know the name and they immediately associate with a particular sector, and like the person's the draw, and we care about what that person's wearing and where they went on vacation and all these other things. We also have that, but a little bit in an unorthodox way. Space is really unique in the sense that it is rife with rich billionaires that, and maybe even a trillionaire soon enough, that are fascinated in and investing in and operating in space. And I think if we can get lucky and engage some of that population, that storytelling becomes really interesting, right? Because suddenly we're talking about some of the richest people on the planet and their visions for humans going to the moon. And that level of storytelling combined with regular cadences of racing operations gives us a very interesting overarching arc where we're just one more lens into one more facet of perspective into this rarefied world of these hyper rich individuals with these crazy ideas about changing humanity. And like, we're not part of that vision in a lot of ways, but we're close enough to it that we're just, again, we're an interesting angle into that world that allows people to consume it as an entertainment product and not necessarily as like following a Bloomberg story or like a Financial Times story about like the latest thing that Elon Musk did, right? So I think that element is also very interesting because I think that theme is also just going to get stronger over the next couple of years. The next 2 years is going to be phenomenal, right? We've got SpaceX coming to market. We've got a couple of other blockbuster IPOs that are also going to have potential space plays. Blue Origin's really coming into its own. We've got 50 other rockets that are about to come on board that some of them are going to be successful. We've got Artemis 3 and 4 that are going to be going back to the moon. When Artemis 4 goes to the moon, they're going to have 250 million live viewers, right? That's basically twice the best performing Super Bowl of all time, right? It'll be the most watched media event in the history of broadcast when it happens. And it's a space event, right? So if you look at the top 10 most watched sports events or the top 10 most watched broadcast events of all time, 2 through 10 are Super Bowls. 1 is the space or the moon landing. So I'm literally just taking the 2 most watched things statistically, and I'm putting them together. And I think that opportunity for the next 24 months is the iron is very hot, right? There's no better time to be trying to do this because there's more attention on space right now than there has been at any point, right? Space in the social zeitgeist is very, very strong. And frankly, 5 years ago, it wasn't, right? It wouldn't have been as compelling, but we are right now. Like I was watching Bloomberg this morning when I was running. Bloomberg was talking about SpaceX, right? Like it is just top of mind for financial and just general news every single day. Every single day people hear about space, and that is just an entirely new feature.
To mention, going into more about storytelling, you mentioned Drive to Survive. And I'm not sure if you've realized, you have a big opportunity, not just to bring something to the world, but to also document it as well. Because Drive to Survive's around, but no, there isn't a modern documentary about how Formula One came to exist, or how tennis came to exist, or how football came to exist. But you have an opportunity to show how Atlas Cup came to exist. Have you thought about that?
Absolutely. So some of the earliest conversations we had in this business, even before we ever even incorporated it, were around how do we go get interest from a Netflix or a Hulu or a Paramount Plus to go off and go help us tell the story of the path towards the first year of space racing. So, I mean, we're actively pursuing that, right? I mean, we would love to see what that looks like. To be fair, I think the world for streamer funded docs is a little bit different than it was, let's say again 5 years ago, right? 5 years ago, 4 years ago, I think Netflix, kind of anecdotally was splashing a lot of cash for these things on spec and self-funding a lot of these types of productions. I think that's pulled back a little bit in the industry. They're still funding it, but it is sometimes more of a, you go do it, and if we like it, we'll field it. And I think that's what we kind of expect, but we really like that idea. So when we think about those, like kind of the monthly check-ins with the teams starting in January, that's also partially this storytelling, right? And I've had a million people tell me, like, for me, just, again, traveling the world, kissing babies and shaking hands, like, I need to be documenting everything because that history lends itself really well to storytelling. If I'm successful, in 5 years, I'm going to look back on it and be like, man, I should have taken more footage and random check-ins back in 2026, right? Like, inevitably. And I'm sure I will do that. But yeah, I think that story is also arguably really interesting and very timely, right? I mean, it's such an insane idea, but documenting and telling the story of like the path to the first competitive event in space, I think people would watch that. I mean, at least they tune into a couple episodes and see it. Maybe we lose some who are like, I'm not cool, space, don't care. Like, okay, fine, they're not going to be our fans, but some people will watch that. That is not going to become like, I don't know, like a Bridgerton spinoff that no one watches because it's like, on at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Like, we'd actually be interesting. So no, I appreciate it, you flagging it, because I should have mentioned it earlier, but very much of interest to us.
I think is one definitely to just, like you said, continue documenting, because by default, there's going to be footage or things that you do within that time frame that some will just go into the archives or go into the bin, for instance, but there is going to be things that come to light. And again, the combination of space and then sports, you're just going to get a different type of viewership and the intrigue to it. Because even when you guys reached out to us, we were like, oh shit, okay, my language, sorry. But like that, I was like, I've never seen anything like this or even heard of anything like this. So just that intrigue itself, and just for argument's sake, if there was a documentary out tomorrow, I know I'd be subscribing to it or watching it as soon as possible in that sense. But in terms of like Atlas Cup itself, maybe I'm thinking forward, but have you like thought about in terms of how many teams in your particular league, for instance, how many Grand Prix? Because I know you mentioned earlier on that you were saying you've got about 5 teams so far, but like in terms of the totality, then how many Grand Prix over the course of like a season, and stuff like that? Because I'm just putting on my like sporting.
Yeah. And again, things are moving very quickly on our end, right? So it's a bit of a dynamic approach, and we have not yet issued our first race rules. We are working on them, and we have a new website and build we're going to go launch, and then some other stuff, and then we'll release rules sometimes around mid-year. So it's, take it with a grain of salt, right? It's still very much TBD. In a perfect world, I'd love 6 teams in the first race. I think that's enough to make it interesting. It's enough for there to be enough content around the storytelling to kind of like fill out what would kind of feel like a season, if you will.
Mhm.
And it's not so many that it creates production problems, because suddenly if we've got 20 teams, we've got 20 teams worth of onboard imagery we got to process, we've got 20 teams worth of tracking data we got to process. It becomes a little bit harder, right? So I need to be like my job is to be successful in the first year and demonstrate the capability, and we can scale, not to go after scale in year one. I mean, there's some appeal there of just going big or going home, but I want to be, again, very realistic about what's executable and have a kind of a crawl, walk, run approach here, where I'm like, okay, here's the idea. Let's go do an initial variant. And then the next year we double it. And the next year we double it. And then the next year we double it. And I think that in my mind is how I want to approach it. So 6 is the ideal number. I think if we have 3, that's kind of that's the litmus, right? That is my, like, I really don't have a sport. If it's just two companies racing head to head, sure, we can do that. But I think 3 would be the absolute bare minimum. And then the maximum, I think, for year 1, again, just to limit the production complexity, would be 12. But interestingly, again, there's 450 companies building propulsion systems, between 150, 200 or so, pick a number. It's really kind of flexible around people building satellites. Those numbers are just increasing. Every week, people are launching new businesses doing these things. We also have people who are not space companies, right? So our teams right now are companies, right? They're people who are already building these satellites, and they're like, hey, look, this is like, we're like the Toyota of space. Like, hell yeah. Like, this makes sense. Let's do it. We're going to show we're cool. It's great marketing, an opportunity to sell ads themselves. There's a whole bunch of reasons why they want to do it. But we also have interest from high net worth individuals who are like, hey, what does it cost to do this? And fundamentally, the cost isn't that high, right? So, I mean, you could buy and field and fly one of these satellites for a couple $1 million. That's kind of like entry level amateur racing prices, right? Like, you want to go race Ferrari Challenge, you're going to pay a couple $1 million for cars and a couple $1 million for operations. And there's plenty of rich tech execs who just race Ferrari Challenge on the weekend because it's fun, right? I mean, like that absolutely, we're right at that price point, right? We're kind of achievable, which is an insane idea that like racing a satellite in space could be on par with like totally achievable car racing. We love that idea. But over time, we want to expand that number because space is really big, right? We could have very reasonably, we could have 100 satellites racing simultaneously, and we'd have really no risk of collision. We'd have no kind of operational complexity once we have the actual content production distribution stack settled. Scaling it actually becomes very easy. And you can imagine the kind of the drama of like a fleet of satellites suddenly performing maneuvers in space could get really, really interesting. So we love the idea of expanding dramatically as the industry expands, as our capabilities expand. Scaling very much is interesting. But initially, we want to keep it fairly reasonable. But over time as well, and this kind of goes to like our broader business strategy a little bit, right? So let me kind of like zoom out just a little bit quickly to provide context for how we think about it, right? The 18 to 34-year-old demographic this year is expected to consume approximately, depending on who you talk to, just over 50% of their sports media content through social and mobile and short format this year. When I first had this idea, I think that number was about 6 or 7%, right? So we've seen this dramatic shift, right? Where suddenly people are consuming sports content on their smartphone on the couch at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. They're not primarily focused at 2 p.m. on a Sunday. And that is a huge difference, I think, for advertisers and how they approach fan activations for their pitches, right? So we love that idea of being able to touch fans at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. on a couch 7 days a week, 365 days a year, because there's no other sports that can do that, right? If you're a human sport, if you are a like linear broadcast sport, you're limited. You're playing at most 3 games a week. Right. So that's maybe 6 hours of total content that you get, that's it. You're physically stuck because that's as many times as you can get people on a plane and take them to a new city unload their gear, get them prepped, let them play, put them back on a plane, send them to the next city. Like you're physically capped. I'm not. Right. So I can go as I scale, we can do a whole bunch of things, right? We can have chemical propulsion, basically rocket powered satellites. We can have electric powered satellites. We can have plasma powered satellites. We can have big satellites. We can have small satellites. We can have college class. We can have professional class. We can have amateur class. We can have solar sails doing long duration races where they kind of just sit there and like float out into space, and we can milestone and track against the milestones and make that competitive. We can do kind of robotics competitions where we have capture the flag, if you will, in space, where we have satellites with robot arms that are able to go off and go grab something, and we tell them at the last minute, go grab this box over here, and if you get this box first, then you win. We can go create content day in and day out, 365 in perpetuity. And I think that's my pitch to advertisers is, look, we're early, it's high risk. Like I'm not out there pitching $10 million sponsorships. We're very reasonable, right? We really, we want to price to the risk. But if I'm successful and we can do this, and I can create kind of a non-stop content production vehicle that in 10 years is literally creating, like, 2 or 3 times a day, 365 days a year, we're dropping content to our fans, and that fan base expands, that is an absolutely phenomenally different like sports advertising model than any other sport that's out there. And I think it'd be very lucrative. Again, it's just, I worry about purely number of impressions. And if I can create more content drops more frequently, my impressions go up. It's very simple, right? It's a linear correlation. And that's what I'm building towards. So sorry, again, I took this question and kind of ran off into the forest with it, but like initially we want to be very realistic and kind of low scope to make sure we can go do what we plan to do and execute realistically. But over time, we want to take that and double it every year so that we're dropping content literally every single day, because that's where the money is.
Anyone will follow up on that?
Now, what I wanted to ask is around a question around the future of humanity and how you see it, because obviously you're seeing it from both angles, space and on Earth. What do you feel like the future of humanity looks like when you take it eventually to space? What changes?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's a great question, actually, and I haven't been asked it before. I think I am a perennial optimist. And I think I'd have to be doing what I'm doing. If I wasn't an optimist, I just could never have wrapped my mind around quitting my job to go do this. But I think the world will be well served. I don't necessarily subscribe to the logic that we're going to have self-sustaining, thriving million-person colonies on the moon or Mars anytime soon, right? That's not almost certainly. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, in which case, great for the people who are doing it. But I don't think that'll happen in my lifetime. I'm sure people will go there. I think that's a given. But will that be a material shift in humanity's experience? I don't think so. That said, I do see substantial Earth-based impacts from the space industry's evolution, and those are going to be palpable and real, right? Things like direct-to-device communication, where you can have a 5G connection literally anywhere on the planet at all times without cell phone towers. I think that's phenomenal, right? That would be really transformative. Things like environmental science capabilities and Earth observation tech, that has so many different applications. So I think it sounds kind of messianic again, but I think Earth will be better, humans will be better off, and life will be better because we develop space. I fully believe that. Do I believe that, to the other kind of like bogeyman in the room today, do I think that AI-based data centers are the future of the world? No, right? I think SpaceX will own that. They're really the only company that can, and they're phenomenal at their execution capabilities, and I'm just constantly impressed by them. I have a million reasons to hate them, and I can't hate them. It's really quite frustrating. I would love to hate on SpaceX, but I just can't. They are too cool. But I think they will have some chunk of compute performance in space, but it's not going to be, like we're not going to, I don't know, like these ideas of like, oh, no one has to work anymore because AI is going to make every job obsolete and we're all going to have unlimited income. Like, no, I don't buy that. That doesn't make any sense to me. Maybe I'm wrong, in which case, great. Like I will happily not work and have someone give me unlimited funds. That'd be wonderful. Just see that happening. But I do also fear a little bit on the non optimistic side of me, right? There is a very disconcerting trend of late around geopolitical tension and frankly just the increase in war fighting. And I think space has always been a warfighting domain. That's where it kind of started, and that's where it is today. And yes, the militaries that control space, in a very real sense, allow commercial opportunities because they kind of have to. But at the end of the day, it's a warfighting domain. That's the primary purpose of space, and really important elements of warfighting too, right? It's the capabilities that protect against, a surprise nuclear attack against the U.S. and the U.K. are space-based, right? Without that, we would be at risk. And I love the fact that we have that capability because it keeps me and my family safe. But things like the war in Ukraine, conflict in North Africa, conflict in the Middle East, rising tensions with China over Taiwan, I think there's a very real risk that goes very poorly, right? I think there's a real chance that we end up in a global conflagration at some point in the near term. That scares the hell out of me. And I don't want to necessarily kind of succumb to that mentality. And I think that's again, I mentioned before, we've seen a little bit of that in the space industry and the space startup ecosystem where every company has pivoted to defense because there's a lot of money going into this Golden Dome program. And everyone's like, how am I going to ignore this trillion or $1 billion pot of money, whatever it is, right? It's a huge amount of cash. I just don't want to subscribe to that. I have to believe that whoever the leaders of these countries are, probably not the one that we have currently in the US, but at some point, a leader somewhere will find a way to dial back tensions, and we will find some sort of a grand bargain where we end up short of a new conflict with Russia in Europe or the US fighting China in the Pacific. Those are horrible outcomes, absolutely phenomenally horrible outcomes. And I just can't wrap my mind around that happening in my lifetime again. And I think space can be, and this is, again, I keep saying I am or am not messianic, and this is going to sound very messianic. I do also have this vision for what sports in space can be for playing a role in the dialing down of geopolitical tensions. If you think about what sport has done in history, there's been really good histories. I think like the US, Russia playing hockey during the Cold War, or US, China and ping pong back in the 90s. Like, nation v nation competition can actually be very catalytic to good relations. And I think historically, the space industry has been very segregated in the sense that US companies don't talk to Chinese space companies. And there's a huge amount of development in China and a huge amount of development in the US, and never the twain shall meet. And I think sports may be an opportunity for there to be safe, collaborative, good-natured competition that demonstrates that we can all work together and kind of like bring down that tension level. But I would say I was on a defense podcast just a couple weeks ago, and I mentioned the idea of, hey, look, like what I'm building could allow a Russian satellite to race a British satellite or a Chinese satellite to race a US satellite. And if we can get that to happen, my God, the storytelling would be so good. My content, it would be phenomenal. And the guy got really concerned. He was like, well, what happens if the Chinese win? And I'm like, well, that's the nature of sport. Like, if we lose, then shame on us. Let's go try harder next time. But like, we shouldn't not race or not compete or shy away from a competition for fear of losing, right? Like, that is not the mentality we want to inculcate in the space industry. We want to celebrate excellence. We want to celebrate objectivity. We want to celebrate the good wherever it comes from, right? And I think that mentality is I think healthy and can help bring down tensions again, right? It's this egalitarian, like, look, if you're functional and you're good and you're real, then let's go celebrate that and get away from this like protective, very kind of like defensive feeling mentality that currently is embodying space. Because I think it just doesn't help us. It just leads us further down that path towards conflict. And I hate that idea.
Yeah, no, that is fantastic, that answer. It was funny that when you mentioned a few of, or like how sports naturally can just bring people, nations together. And the examples that you mentioned were, and we had it, I think, 1914, England versus Germany football, which is soccer for you guys, on Christmas Day. That was kind of like the unofficial truce in that sense. But with the current like geopolitical landscape, have you ever felt like if tensions are to rise with what's currently going on, it could potentially be somewhat of a stumbling block to how you see one Atlas Cup going and then just your future and how you're determining things in space?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, you've basically flagged the one real structural existential risk this business has. If there is conflict in space, highly likely space will be inaccessible for a period of time, and I'm dead. I mean, bottom line, I don't exist, and I can't fix that. Right? That is the immutable risk of the world. But I would say that that's no different than, I don't know, like a nuclear war taking out all the major cities in the eastern seaboard. Okay, well, that's a bunch of stadiums are going to be gone. Where are you going to play football, right? So same logic. And again, I just, I'm realistic about the risk because I have to be, especially for my investors, to say, hey, well, look, like in theory, if things go south with China, very realistically, we will be unable to operate for 5 to 10 to 15 years. I mean, it's a risk. They can factor it in however they want to factor it in. I don't have it factored into my model because, again, I can't wrap my mind around that actually happening. Because frankly, the lack of sports in space would be everyone's the least thing, like the last thing on our minds, right? Like if that happens, like our ATM cards won't work anymore, cars won't have GPS. Like, let's be realistic. Like we got bigger problems at that point. But it is a risk. It's a totally fair point. It is a very real risk for us.
So, as well as the satellites going into space, have you thought about any deeper explorations into space, as in going to Mars or going to different planets?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned the idea of solar sail racing. And again, there are other people out there who are pursuing this idea. So I don't want to take wind out of their sails, as it were. But we've independently also looked at it and thought this could be very interesting, not because solar sails from a technology perspective are all that compelling. That they're very big and they look kind of cool, but they go very, very slowly, right? But to the idea that we want to have long duration events where I can go create arbitrary milestones and do content check-ins, where I can take let's call it a 1,000-day trip to Mars. And I can go create every 10 days we check in and see what's working. And it might be a 30-second content drop, but it's basically free and we can produce it over and over and over. And it's very, very easy. We actually like that idea. I would love to put, a bunch of solar sails loose and send them out on their way to Mars. And it's basically free content for the next 5 years, right? We can check in on the solar sails and see where they are. Arguably not the most exciting thing, but and we haven't even mentioned the gaming element of this, but we are looking at finding ways to integrate with the prediction markets and sports betting broadly. And we love the idea of taking long format sport and creating bettable milestones. And because of the nature of this event, we can kind of set the number of milestones arbitrarily, right? So if you're doing an orbit raise or a trip out to Mars or something like that, we can arbitrarily set as many binary check-ins as we want, where the betting opportunity would be at milestone 37, plus or minus some percent, like who's going to be in the lead, right? And we can gamify a whole bunch of this stuff. And again, I don't necessarily think that's going to be a core element to our business, but to the extent that it's novel and interesting and kind of fun and costs us very little from a time and effort and cash perspective to go off and go do it, we love that idea. Over time as well, I think further out maneuvers get very, very interesting. So quickly, there's a interesting gravitational world in between the Earth and the Moon. And there's these things called Lagrange points. So they kind of exist around the Earth and Moon. And they basically are points where the combined gravitational forces of the Earth and the Moon create kind of like neutral points where you can go and like do weird little like slingshot maneuvers, or you can go and loiter for a period of time. And we've historically, a couple of companies have looked at how to go do some interesting maneuvers around these things, like flying out to the moon and corkscrewing around the moon and then going out to one of these points and then popping back into the normal belt of satellites. And they're really compellingly visually interesting to watch when you see the visualizations of something flying around the moon in a corkscrew and then flying back towards Earth. It looks really cool. So we love integrating something like that. But to be fair, it's substantially more complex. But also something that's becoming much more accessible, right? So there's a number of different programs on the government side and a lot of commercial interest in the development of the moon. That means more rockets are going to the moon. And with each one of those rockets, you'll have a primary payload, right? Like a NASA lander or something. And you're going to have a bunch of small payloads, right? So people are flying commercial satellites on a lot of these missions. And that opportunity basically increases the chance for us to go create content there. And then similarly, out to Mars, yes. But the problem is, even with the best chemical propulsion we have today, Mars is still, I think, like what, 180, 200-day trip in the most optimal alignment. That's kind of hard. That's pretty long format even for us, right? But I would say there are sports on Earth that are similar, right? Vendée Globe or Volvo Ocean Race, right? Like the kind of long duration sail racing in the Southern Ocean. That is very, very popular, and it's been going on for decades, and it is weeks at a time, right? And sometimes they're weeks at a time where they're not even, they're on like a Starlink connection, and like, they're not even within reach of a helicopter, right? It's just like some guy on a boat in the South Pacific, like just sailing, right? So maybe, and then also, sorry, I'm taking this a whole bunch of different ways, but just kind of, there's a lot of variety here that we can think about down the road. There's also a number of companies out there looking at nuclear propulsion. So using, fission to basically go off and go create like really strong rockets. And that tech actually can create faster maneuver and transport. So in theory, maybe we can go do longer duration missions like to Mars in shorter duration and make it more interesting from a content production perspective. That tech's very early. I know some people who are building in that space. It's super promising. There's a lot of interest, but it's still many, many years from being real.
Right. Quick one. When you're building the future, do you lose track of anything in the present?
Yeah, Jacob, you're asking great questions. Yeah, it's interesting, right? There's definitely, on the personal side, yeah, I think one of the biggest transitions that it's taken to go from being kind of CEO of a company where there's this structure and schedule and support staff to me solo founding something that's new and different and requires a whole bunch of stuff all the time, is kind of the personal management element, right? And like, I've got 2 daughters, they're 10 and 11. Like I like being active in their lives and doing stuff with them. I take them to their ballet classes and then gymnastics events and things like that. I like that. And I still do that. And it's just meant I've had to be very cautious about separating, like, okay, I'm going to go spend the next 2 hours with my kids, and like, I'll take my laptop just in case something comes up, but like, I will have to kind of separate it, because otherwise, to your point, it is very, very easy to suddenly just kind of like get myopically focused on building this and lose track of like, hey, like I need to go run every day, and like my dogs want to go to the beach and my kids need me to say hi to them, right? And then I think also there's some risk on the business development side as well, in the sense that I get a lot of energy from talking to people like you guys and talking about the concepts and what the future can hold. And like, it's so fun, but there's a lot of work that has to go into actually executing on this, right? Like I've got, I think, I don't know, my to-do list is like 260 items, many of which are very, very late, that like I have to go do. And there's no one else who's going to do them. And I can spend entire days talking to people, and I get very little of that to-do list done, but I love the hell out of it because I get to talk about this amazing idea and what we're building. And there has to be also, this goes back to like the personal management, right? It's a little bit of like, okay, I've got to be realistic about like, I can go pitch the hell out of the idea, but if I'm not doing the underlying homework today, I'm not going to be able to execute in 18 months. So I have to always balance that, like, okay, I got to spend like 2 days doing like boring blocking and tackling to make sure that like I have the things done that need to be done on the right timeline. And that's a constant struggle. And one that, to be fair, back to the hiring point, like it would be great. Like it would be kind of wonderful actually to have like a good chief of staff or a COO right now who could kind of take some of that. But that is, yeah, it's just, it's a struggle.
I can imagine.
Question. What do you feel like society is underestimating about what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I don't know if they are. This sounds so kind of egotistical, but it's not intended to be. Like when I decided to do this, right? And then I quit my job at the end of the year. I took a holiday with the kids, and I came back and I started the company in January. I had to kind of hype myself up to be ready and able to handle 6 months of rejection. That was my plan. I was like, all right, I'm going to have 6 months where people are going to tell me I'm an insane person. Doors are going to get slammed in my face. People won't respond to emails. And I was like, Philip, you got to be okay with it. If you can't handle that level of rejection, you shouldn't do it and keep your job. And then it didn't happen. Right. I've basically had no doors slammed in my face. Everyone's been very supportive, other than the occasional partner who's like, hey, we love what you're doing, but like, we're not for us right now. We're focused on defense world. Like, cool. So I don't know if people are necessarily actively underestimating, but I think to take this in like the more optimistic perspective, what I think people miss is the scale. And I think that's partially intentional, right? So I don't focus on the future all that much in most of my conversations with investors or partners. It's very much around what the near term execution path looks like. It's the go to market strategy. It's like what are the next 2 to 3 years? What do I need to do? How do I make this realistic? How do I show that we're ready to go produce race operations and distribute content, right? That it's the bread and butter. It's like the stuff we have to be good at to prove that we're real. So I don't usually focus on the, hey, what can this be? But what this can be is actually what people underestimate, because sports is a big business, a phenomenally large business. I mean, just look at the valuations for sports teams, the entire sports asset class for, league ownership, team ownership, rights, it's amazing, right? I mean, $100 million deals don't even get in the news, right? Like minimum deal size to make the news is like $1 billion. That's wild, right? So I think people don't realize the TAM that I'm going after. The TAM here is everyone on the planet with a smartphone, right? So 6 billion-ish people is my target market. And I'm going into a market where that market represents hundreds of billions of dollars a year and soon to be trillions, right? And that's like sports broadly, right? And that is a huge, huge, huge opportunity. And I think I'm so new, and this is such a different take, that I think people, especially people in the space industry, haven't really kind of clued into the fact that sports is a huge standalone business. And to the extent we can integrate it into the space ecosystem and create kind of a new vertical, my God, if I'm successful and this scales, even if we get 2 or 3% of the sports market, it's billions, like absolutely like phenomenal billions, right? And I think that's partially it. And I think the other part is this kind of, again, messianic idea of at the point where humans race in space, it's going to be the most watched sporting event in the history of sports. That's what people miss. And it's because I don't talk about it that much, because I feel like I sound like a crazy person when I say it. And like, I know that I'm right. I know that this is real, and I know we'll get there eventually. And I know I'm not an insane person. I'm not trying to do that next year, right? Like I'm not a crazy person, but that I think is what people miss. People underestimate that potential, where if we're in a position where humans are racing in space and it's the most watched sporting event in history, it's not 2 to 3% of the sports market. It's more. Right? If sports in space can eventually become 5%, 7% of the sports market, it's tens of billions of dollars every year.
Yep.
That is a scale that is basically unachievable in space companies by anyone other than SpaceX or Blue Origin or Boeing, right? That would make us one of the biggest properties in the space industry just from that 5% share. And I think, and that's one of those stories, again, that I'm not leaning into necessarily, because again, I think people, even though I can say it a million times, people I think will hear me talking about humans racing in space and think I'm a crackpot who's out there pitching humans racing in space today. I'm again, just to say it again, I'm not, right? I'm not an insane person. I'm very realistic about what technology can support, right? We could do racing in space today. It would just cost a few $1 billion and no one's going to go fund it. But I want to, again, be very realistic about today and very forward leaning about what tomorrow can hold, because that is what people underestimate.
The thing is, people always say you're crazy until it works anyway. So it's probably best you're focused on doing it your way anyway. And then when it works, they'll be like, oh, I knew all along. So from your perspective, I can totally understand it. It's like an inspiring conversation, because the way you believe and the passion that you come with in this sector is like, why not? Why would you not believe in you? Everything you've said to us today is like, 100% is going to work. There's no doubt in your mind. It's putting no doubt in our minds. So I feel like any investor that's out there would just literally go, well, off of this pitch, why would I not? So yeah, no, very, very inspiring from my part, to be fair.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah. And that's, again, it's this idea of inevitability, right? It's that this will happen. The worst case scenario is I'm a little bit too early, right? That's the risk. But I think the technical story tells me that that's not true, right? The fact that all the things I need already exist means I'm not too early, right? If I was out there pitching this idea, like I got to go build A, B, and C and test them and fly them, and then we can go do this, then yeah, I think that would be a little bit more skeptical. But everything I need is proven. Everything I need is available, if not already in space. So I think that limits that risk. So I love it.
100%.
Nice. Okay. I was thinking whilst you were going on that last part, what would you say that people get wrong about space or the negative connotation about space?
Oh, interesting. So the thing that people get wrong that I think is actually a bit of a challenge for us that we have to overcome is, it sounds a little bit insane, but the average person doesn't understand astrodynamics very well. And that makes sense. To be fair, until I got in the space industry.
I'm the average
Right?
person.
Yeah,
Yep.
we
Right?
are them.
But it's like, so like, like many people think orbit is going up, right? Like orbit's actually going sideways really, really, really fast, right? And then going fast enough sideways that you maintain your position relative to the Earth. So we actually today are starting to film our first content with our race architect engineer around starting some of that explanatory content to go help people understand this is what it means to be on orbit. This is what it means to have a shift from one orbit to another orbit. This is how you do it, right? And we have to educate people, right? So I think right now we have space as this thing that we all understand to exist. It's kind of hard to wrap our minds around because it's this like massive, very hard to comprehend reality that we're on this tiny little pale blue dot in this huge expanding universe. And the existential element of it is a little bit overwhelming for many people. But that's kind of as far as our thinking goes, right? Like many people aren't out there trying to understand like how the gravitational interaction between the Earth and the moon creates interesting slingshot opportunities, right? But we can educate people on that. And I think that education becomes part of our content stack, right? It's about getting the next generation who are arguably going to be more impacted by the space industry, educated in and fluent in what space is and how it works and what it does. And I think educational content is really interesting, again, because we're going after that younger demo. So what I'm really thinking is, how do I go get my fans in 2035 smart on what space is today? So by the time they get to 2035 and can go buy things from my sponsors, that it's already part of their lexicon, right? It's already part of like how they think about the world. And then let's see. The other part was like, I'm sorry, what was the second part? It was like what
In terms of that, the negative connotations like around space in general.
Yeah. I think it's going to sound kind of weird. Like the UFO element, I think, is still very prominent in the public understanding of space, right? I think there's still some element of people just broadly that are like, space is scary because that's where aliens come from, right? I think I don't know. I'm like of two minds here, right? Like one, I think the universe is so big. I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen like that equation of like, look, if it's 0.01% of planets and 0.01% of solar systems and 0.01% of stars and 0.01% of this, and it's like, even if you take this like tiny number times a tiny number times a tiny number, and that's the percentage likelihood that something else is out there, it's still like billions of other life forms out there. So I don't know. Somewhere, sometime, does one exist? I don't know, probably. Are we ever going to see one here? Are we ever going to interact with one in my lifetime? Oh my God, no, right? Almost certainly not. But still, I think it is an interesting thing. For me, it's like an intellectual curiosity, right? It's something that's like, fun to think about, and it's kind of mind-blowing. But I think for many people, that association between like existential dread and space is still very prominent. And I think part of that comes back to creating new media, and how we fix it is creating new media around space. And this is one of those things that I think is why we're going to be successful. And it's, the imagery from space is phenomenal, right? Like images of the Earth with the sun rising behind it and the stars twinkling, they're emotional images. And you guys are F1 fans, right? Like part of the reason people watch Monaco, it's not necessarily for the course, right? But like Monaco Grand Prix, like, yeah, some of the turns are iconic, but like it's partially the fact that it's the Côte d'Azur and it's the Monaco skyline and it's the yachts, it's the scene, right? And we're creating arguably not a new type of sport, right? It's just head-to-head racing. Right? It's not a new format. People have done it. We're just doing it in this environment that is phenomenally different. And I think as we start to share that visualization and we share these really like high saturation 4K images of spacecraft flying around the Earth, I think that can start to change how people think about it. It's no longer going to be this scary thing that they see in sci-fi movies where gooey aliens are eating people. It's going to be more, hey, this is real and it's gorgeous, and look at this. And it starts to kind of create some of that imaginative, emotional, visceral connection that we need. Because again, otherwise we're just a sport with Mini Coopers flying in space. That by itself is not interesting. We have to have the human storytelling, which we've talked about, and we have to have enough visual, compelling content that people see it and they're like, oh man, I want to keep watching, right? Or like, I'm going to check back the next time and see if there's another really cool image, right? So I was just talking to a company yesterday who does really beautiful camera tech in space. And the funny thing is, this company was started by some guys who came out of TV. And the founder actually has won Oscars and Emmys for like video technologies and like how he's done it. And that combination, again, I'm starting to see these connective tissues where we've got new companies that are actively thinking about the media environment for space. We've got one of our partners, they're building out a constellation, and one of their verticals is media and content production in space. And this camera company is from people from media who left media like 2 years ago to start a space company to take the best of media content or camera production and put it in space. We love that, right? And I think so that visual storytelling can get ahead of that kind of like that the negative connotation of like, ooh, space is scary, and that's where aliens come from.
I mean, that is that answer itself in terms of like the negative connotation. I definitely didn't see that coming, but that was a fantastic answer in that self.
You didn't think we were going to be talking about aliens today?
I mean, I may have had that in my notes now, but yeah, no, that was very cool. Just before we wrap up, we're going to put you on the spot, and it's something we do for all our guests in general. And it's completely something separate from the whole conversation. We do a segment called Song of the Week. So whatever song that has been on your particular playlist, whether that's today, for the week, or maybe for the month, or in this case, for the Atlas Cup duration that has kept you going, what is your song of this particular moment?
Oh my gosh, you're going to hate my answer. I am such a weird person when it comes to music. So what you can't see behind me is I got a grand piano over there covered in classical music. And that's like my outlet is playing classical. The guitars are just like for stress relief. I don't even play them well. But so I think from a musical perspective, it's both what I'm listening to and playing. It's a Chopin berceuse for Madame Elise Bavard. And it is this like phenomenally difficult but beautiful piece. And I've been working on it for weeks and listening to it in different variants. And it is the anthem right now. And it sounds weird because it's like this like very slow, melodic, elegant piece of Chopin, but it is really it's focusing for me. But weirdly, my like musical connectivity is like EDM and house and classical. Like that is like, I for some reason I can't function with music with words. Like, I mean, I certainly listen to it, but like, it's not like part of the core repertoire, right? It's all like progressive house and then like classical music. But the last week has been full on classical. I'm like trying very hard. I do these annual recordings for my kids where I'll do basically like 12, 14 tracks of classical that I have a full recording setup over there too. Then I'll basically like play classical music and record it, and I'll get it put on a 12-inch vinyl or whatever, 18-inch vinyl. I don't even know the sizes. And basically like that's like one of my Christmas gifts that I give to my kids. So it's now almost June, and I'm like, oh my God, I need to start like working on the pieces that I'm going to have to record for Christmas. So, yeah, probably not the answer you were expecting, but yeah.
No, that's fine. One of the guests we had a couple months ago, he's currently learning, he's been learning over the last year to play the guitar, and he kind of gave a similar-ish answer in terms of something that was unexpected for us. But I love how different it is in terms of classical to EDM house, because it's complete opposite ends of the spectrum. But hey, whatever works. Yeah. Classical, that's not as much my bag, maybe the other two guys, but the EDM house I can fully relate in that sense.
Yeah, no, classical is not in my repertoire, to be honest. I've listened to some classical tracks, but not knowing, it just comes on usually on YouTube if I'm just listening to music, and it's like, okay, cool, this is just gonna play, and it's a nice feeling for a period of time for me if I need to relax and that sort of stuff.
It's interesting. I probably wouldn't be into it if I didn't play it. And it's always been like listening to someone play the song I'm working on learning has always been this very interesting juxtaposition and comparison. I think that if I were just listening to it, I'm probably right there with you. I'd be like, okay, sounds pretty, but not for me.
What is it with music music with lyrics that doesn't get to you as much in terms of, like you were saying, music without lyrics?
I don't know. I think my brain just works weirdly. I think there's also something about like even in classical, like some of the rhythmic progressive elements that you see in like progressive house, I think appear, and there's something about it that like it just focuses me. And then the moment you introduce lyrics, like even if I try to listen to opera, for instance, I can't handle opera. It somehow it just screws with how my brain functions. So I don't know. It's just like I've got a weird brain, I guess. But it's not that I don't like it. It's just that it's super distracting. So if I'm gonna go like, listen to like, I don't know, like listen to like a bunch of like backpack rap from the 90s, and it's like that is like its own thing. That's like I've got to be in a car. I'm gonna be driving. I have no work to do. Like I can't focus on anything else, and I have to like let myself listen to that, and that's the only thing my brain can focus on. Whereas if I'm listening to EDM, I can like do work, I can run, I can work out, I can do something and it gives me energy. Or if I'm listening to classical, I can focus, I can kind of like live my life. But again, it's not to the exclusion of like, again, my love for 1990s backpack rap. It's just that I've got to be like right time and place, and it's like the only thing I can do.
Oh,
That makes sense.
fair. That's fair. Dej, Jacob, what's your song of the week? Might be harder for us because we've been doing live recordings near enough every day in terms of what's happening sports wise here. So we've been giving our songs like, every day. But anyone, or do you want me to go?
No, I can go next. My one is from an artist called Steady, and the song is called Jericho.
Okay, nice.
Yeah,
mine's Stevie Wonder
this week.
Mine's Stevie Wonder, and it's Too High. So I enjoy the elements of how Stevie Wonder puts music together. It kind of takes a classical approach with a jazz approach and a blues approach, and just all into one. So,
and mine is Jay-Z, Never Change, and I think that being my song of the week, just this whole conversation and your approach to the Atlas Cup and how you approach things in general, Philip, never change.
Love it. Yeah, we'll do.
Cool. Well, I guess that wraps up a fantastic episode, fantastic conversation. Philip, we really appreciate you giving us your time. Obviously, you're 8 hours behind us, so it's early in the morning for you, but the energy is fantastic and we really appreciate it, and it's transmitted through us as well. And we're definitely looking forward to seeing what's to come with Atlas Cup, and as well as the future in space and what else more you've got to present. I already followed you on LinkedIn, so I know I'm going to be keeping up with everything in that sense. But yeah, if you've got any, not advice, but final words for our viewers and listeners that you could potentially say.
Yeah, I would just say to stay tuned, right? Follow us, like us. We are trying to build that fan base now, and just hang tight, and we're going to start producing content, releasing content literally in a couple weeks. So more and more and more to come. And then just stay tuned because it's the future of sport. So
Thank you. Definitely the future of sport, the first orbital sport. Hey, we'll be watching, even if it's 2-3 a.m. here. We're used to staying up late due to NBA, NFL, and if the F1's in Vegas, etc. So yeah, that's normal for us. But yes, Philip, thank you very much for joining. To our
guys.
listeners and viewers, please check out the Atlas Cup. It's very exciting in terms of what's to come. Please follow up with this episode as well. As Philip said, he's going to be presenting more stuff via socials. And yeah, we can't wait.
Cool. Well, yeah, thanks for having me on, guys.
Thank you very much.